This is Lynn Elkins of IBM's Washington System Center, and today I'm going to be talking about gathering the MQ SMF or System Management Facility data. This is the agenda for this session. We'll be talking about the MQ SMF and collection classes and how to set up for the capture of the different types of data. The MQ SMF data is broken up into two different types: the statistics data, which is also known as the 115s, and the accounting data, which is also known as the 116s. We use the terms 115 in statistics data and 116 in accounting data interchangeably when we're talking about these as well. The generation of this information from a Q manager is controlled by the type, statistics or accounting, and the class. Please don't confuse the classes with the record subtypes. These subtypes of our major records include everything from continuation records to some new records that are produced by different internal tasks within the Q manager. The statistics classes include classes 1 and 2, which cover the data that is produced by the Q manager's different internal tasks, often called managers, like the message manager and the data manager. And class 4, which controls the production of the channel initiator statistics. The accounting classes are more distinct. Class 1 is for what is called the QMAC data, originally developed prior to MQ version 6, and it's typically only used for chargebacks. Class 3 data is the task accounting data, which includes information about each task, including detail about CPU consumption, latching, and often the most important piece of all, the queues that are used by the tasks. This is complex and verbose data, but is often necessary to debug responsiveness and performance problems. Class 4 is the channel accounting data, providing information about connections to the Q manager and the data flowing across those connections. The MQ statistics provide information about the basic health of the Q manager, how it's operating, how resources are being used and sometimes abused, a basic count of the number of API requests that have come through. It is very high-level data. It's very lightweight. It's primarily used to track major trends, provide information to resolve some gross performance problems within the Q manager or channel initiator themselves. These should always be gathered and should be kept for a while. They can help with doing trend analysis and capacity planning as well. This is just a list of the source and subtype of all the statistics data that we have. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the MQ accounting, and that is a whole lot more data. The Class 1 accounting, or the QMAC records, is an older style of information, and they can give you some very high-level information about the total CPU used for individual tasks, and a count of messages that were put or gotten from a rather broad range of message sizes that were used by this particular task. It doesn't identify the individual queues. It doesn't do any more breakdown of the CPU than that. We don't use it very much these days. I do still see it occasionally used for chargebacks, as I said earlier. The MQ task accounting data, or the Class 3 data, it's larger and more prolific. Most people hesitate before they start generating this data. Individual tasks get multiple records, the WTID or task identification records, where we can get information like the CICS transaction ID or the channel names, if it happens to be from a mover task. The WTAS is the second record type that we see in there. It's the task statistics record. And this is where we see information about latching, CPU from task-related requests like commits, and possibly there will be attached to this many WQ records, or what we call the Q statistics or Q accounting records. These contain information about all the requests that were made against the individual queues and the CPU that was associated with those requests that were made, etc. These records are cut at the end of every task, and for long-running tasks, they will also be cut at the SMF intervals that are crossed as part of this task process. The channel accounting records or class 4 records are accumulated and produced at the SMF intervals, not when the channel stops and starts. It contains a great deal of information about the traffic flowing across channels and can be used to help better understand how busy some channels are. I'm often asked about the overhead involved with the collection and production of the task accounting data. And I've written several blog posts, responses on forums, responded to direct questions, etc. on this one topic. There's been a lot of miscommunication over the years about these costs. Initially, customers were told that the cost to gather this data and produce it was around 10% CPU overhead. What we have found is that 10% number was actually a guesstimate, not a measured value. But as we all know, once a value is stated, it becomes part of the legend of the product. What we have found in practice and what live customers have reported is that the overhead is between 3 and 7% CPU. And if you're using log streams for the SMF data, the cost is lower. Some customers have reported that they did not see any appreciable increase in CPU utilization for some of their queue managers because they are primarily using long-running transactions, log streams for gathering the data, and they are on currently available hardware and software licensing. All these things make a difference. It's also very difficult to estimate the cost because it is very dependent on the application style. If the applications are transaction-based and you get one transaction per message, the cost for gathering the data will be higher. If your workload is much more batch-oriented or is built around long-running CICS or IMS transactions, the cost will be lower. The cost for gathering and interpreting this data will be exponentially higher if you are trying to debug a performance problem or an application problem and you have never turned this data collection on and never reviewed this information before. This is a list of the source and subtypes of the 116 or accounting data. So now let's talk about how to actually turn on the data capture. Many MQ administrators set up the capture of the SMF data in the Z Parms, and those are the parameters that control the running of the queue manager and channel initiator address spaces. So the first attribute we're going to talk about is the stat time, and this value controls how long the duration is between the production of the SMF data. It is in minutes. This controls both the statistics data and the production of those long-running task accounting records. The default value is set to 30 minutes, which I really do not like. A better value to use is the special value of 0, which will coordinate the production of the MQ SMF data with the global SMF interval set for the LPAR in the system's parameter modules. This is the setting that I normally recommend. The value in the stat time can be set to any integer up to 1440, which is once per day. Please do not set this value any higher than 30 minutes. The default value for the SMF stat attribute, which controls the collection of statistics, is set to no. This is unfortunate at best. It should be set to an asterisk so that the MQ statistics for all the different classes will be reported. The default value of the SMF ACCT or accounting attribute is also set to no. However, this is really not a problem because controlling the production of the accounting SMF data is typically done through commands, which will be covered next. We do have some customers that have accounting data generated all the time, though. The stat time can be adjusted via a normal command prefix or CPF command as shown. When you use this command to alter the stat time, the change takes effect at the next interval. My typical recommendation, as I said, is to set the value to 0 for normal processing to coordinate the production of the SMF and RMF records. If, however, you are investigating a performance or responsiveness problem, setting the value to every 5 minutes or lower can help pinpoint underlying issues. Some customers set the stat time to every minute during some of their peak periods, knowing that they cannot easily replicate the volume and the micro spikes of messages that can arrive during those peaks. This produces a lot more data, but that may be necessary to see small changes in processing volume and the timing of that volume that can really cause problems in a very active system. Starting the collection of MQ-SMF data, called traces, can also be done via CPF commands. Statistics and counting traces do default to SMF for the output. If the Q manager has never had statistics gathering enabled, it can be done with this command, but please be aware that the first record produced will show data accumulated since the Q manager was started or restarted, so it should be ignored for evaluation purposes. For Q managers that have been in production for several years without a reassemble and link of the ZParm macro, the class 4 statistics may need to be started independently as shown in the second example. I often recommend that the class 1 accounting data not be turned on if they've not been used in the past, just to avoid some of that overhead and volume of SMF records that we're not really going to be using for a health check or to evaluate performance and responsiveness. So instead of the asterisk in the class parameter, I typically recommend using a class specifically for 3 or 4 to gather the task accounting and channel accounting data. This makes it easier to not have to look at some extraneous data that's not important to what we're trying to do. For Q managers that have been in production for several years without a reassemble and link of the ZParm macro, the class for accounting may also need to be started independently, as shown in the fourth example. When gathering the task accounting data, it's important to verify that the queues have queue monitoring and accounting turned on. Unfortunately, some of the default definitions for, like I'm showing here for the system cluster transmission queue, have this turned off instead of set to use the queue manager defaults. When investigating a performance or responsiveness problem and clustering is in use, this information can be vital. Really, all queues need to be checked. I wish that these defaults could be changed, but that's not likely to happen. Another area to check is in the Q Manager startup, the input commands that are come in CSQINP2. You'll notice that in this particular case, the values that are set up in CSQ4INYG are definitely not what I would choose if I was trying to get some information about my Q manager out of the SMF data. I hope this has given you the information you need on how to set up your Q managers and channel initiators for capturing the SMF data that is so critical in knowing how your Q manager and channel initiators are running, and to look into problems that you may have in both performance and in problem determination. Post-processing of the data will be part of the series soon. Thank you again. This has been Lynn Elkins of IBM's Washington System Center, and I look forward to hearing from you at any time.